Hello, hello, back again with Day Drinking. I'm David, and I'm very, very excited for a little something different this week, moving into the sake realm. We are going to welcome the wonderful Monica Samuels from Vine Connections to talk about her exceptional portfolio of sake, and I'm going to invite her right now, and I'm so excited. Monica, here we go. Right, it's on. Ah, oh, Monica-san.
Hi, how's it going?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited. I feel very happy that it's 3 hours later where I am and you're already drinking.
I'm a little early today, but yeah, I mean, it's noon somewhere. It's noon here. I'm so happy to see you. Everything going well. I mean, despite the obvious. I guess I saw you not too long ago. We had sushi not too long ago. That was a blast. And look what came of it. We're so lucky.
I know. I seem to just bring the cold weather everywhere I go. I'm in LA last time I saw you, and we're about to get hit with a snowstorm in New York here. But everything's good. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, since most people don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got here? And, you are one of the most knowledgeable people in the, shall I put it mildly, hard to crack sake category. And, I value everything that you've taught me over the years. So yeah, tell us how you got here. What's your story?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the very high praise. So I'm the vice president of sake and spirits for Vine Connections. I know it sounds like we're a wine company, but we actually sell more sake than wine. And we launched our own division, a separate division this year called Kome Collective. Kome is the Japanese word for rice. But I have been working with sake professionally since about 2003, but it's kind of in my blood. I'm half Japanese. My mother was born and raised in Japan, and I grew up bilingual and spending a lot of time in Japan. And my grandfather actually worked as a sake brewer for a while in
Oh,
Ibaraki,
wow.
which is pretty close to where my family is from in Tokyo. So yeah, spent a lot of time growing up around sake. And I'm from LA as well, and when all my friends were working at Greasy Spoons, I was able to get employed at a lot of really high end sushi restaurants because I could communicate with the chef. And so
Hmm.
being the go to sake person happened organically. And I moved to New York in at the end of 2003 and started working for a big restaurant group very focused on sake, and that set them apart. So I spent a lot of time studying sake, was able to spend time in a few different breweries in Japan and learn from a lot of amazing educators. And I worked for a small company, you might have heard of them, Southern Wine and Spirits, for about 6 building a sake portfolio for them in
Hmm.
work. And then it's been 8 years now that I've been on the import side. So I feel I love it, and I'm really glad that we're drinking these specific sakes today. That it's I think a hopefully more than a coincidence that these are ones that you've gravitated towards, but these are ones that I've had the ability to be really involved in bringing into our portfolio, and they're good friends of mine, and I'm excited to be representing them.
That's really cool. And so your job entails obviously dealing with the market, but you're also in Japan meeting brewers, making decisions about what are going to be imported, right? I mean, that is a complicated situation. I know the shipping must itself right now must be insane. Um,
Yeah, it's
but
hard.
yeah.
Hitting everyone on all levels. But yeah, so I am very lucky that I get to be involved in curating the portfolio. When our company started importing sake in 2000, the portfolio was originally put together by John Gottner, who's legend sake expert, and he still works with us. And so John and I now work together to evaluate different producers, make sure that they're a good fit, and decide who we want to chase after. So that is the fun part. The supply chain part is not the fun part, but we got out of the pain of 2021 and we're in pretty good shape moving forward. I've learned more than I ever wanted to know about global logistics and trafficking and things like that. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a tough. Well, and particularly coming across the Pacific, I think right now I mean, it's ridiculous. What used to take us 6 to 8 weeks coming through Panama is 26 weeks now. And I know it's just as bad, if not way worse, coming the other way. So tell us a little bit about sort of like your sake philosophy. Like, what do you look for in a sake when you are evaluating producer? I mean, obviously you want to have a broad, such a diverse category, which I think is part of the fun thing. American consumers tend to pigeonhole sake into a very, we still have customers that basically, all they ask is, oh, I want it to be dry, and that's cool. But there's so much more to the flavor profile. What attracts you to certain brewers over others? And do you have a sort of ethos or something that you're looking for when you're selecting sake?
yeah, I try to keep it really simple. I mean, generally, when I evaluate a sake, the first thing I decide is this a red wine sake or a white wine sake? And a white wine sake to me tastes better at a colder temperature. It's generally more bright and vibrant and elegant in style. And a red wine sake is more high acid, high umami, more soulful, and has a broader spectrum of temperatures it can be enjoyed at and foods it can be paired with. There's this bar in Tokyo, and their menu is double-sided. And one side of the menu is sake that goes with oysters, and the other side is sake that goes with ham. And it's kind of, I mean, I feel like it's a similar philosophy where at first you make that distinction. Like, is this a lifted, pretty elegant style that you want to drink chilled in a wine glass that's great for a Riesling drinker, someone who loves those really heady aromatics? Or is this a big, fat, rich style that's going to evolve in the glass? Maybe you even want to decant it. And so I think talking about sake, the most important thing is to talk about the experience in the glass, because you can show people grains of rice at different polishing rates all day long and show them what the size of a tank and what it looks like to press the liquids off the solids. And that, I guess, is helpful if someone's trying to go home and brew sake. But if you're trying to pick a sake to go with what you're cooking for dinner, it really doesn't serve you. So I think just really like not having to worry so much about production and the technical phrases, and just thinking about, okay, just really trusting your palate, which I think is Americans struggle with, and they really want to be told what's good or told how to drink things. But I think you have to discover it for yourself, which is the fun about sake, but I think the frustration about sake for people who just want it spelled out for them.
Well, and it's wildly complex category. You can have a Daiginjo that tastes like water, and one that tastes like mushrooms. It all depends on so many factors going on, and of course a lot of the breweries are regional, and they have a regional customer base, and so they're made within the context of what's being served there, and what people are enjoying and how they're living, and then how do you translate that into the American context? I mean, a lot of people come in asking for sake because they're going to sushi dinner, and for the first time in the last couple of years, people are starting to come in and be like, yeah, I'm having bolognese, but I feel like sake. Like, what are we gonna do? And that's so refreshing, because people are expanding their understanding of the category, and I think in a huge part to the efforts of people like you who are breaking it down more in the context that people are familiar with. Red and white is such a quick, easy way to, are you feeling like white wine tonight? Then have this one. If you feel, and that's such an easy way. And then that also draws you to pairings, which is such an important part of drinking sake, is eating, very much in the, in the way that Europeans think about wine. In Italy, you don't drink wine without food. I mean, even if it's a little bit of something, if you're going to drink without food, go have a spritz or something. Like, that's
And it's
so key.
like pairing sake with sushi is kind of the least fun for me, because if you think about eating sushi, you can't nail it with every single piece with one bottle of sake. You know, that sake might be so amazing when you pair it with uni, and it might have this like briny saline magic that happens where you feel like you're swimming in the ocean next to that sea urchin, but it might not be great with eel or with salmon. And so I'm much more comfortable talking about sake with bolognese than sake with sushi, because that world is so broad. And what Japan does really well is kind of steals from other cultures and perfects it. So there's more Michelin-starred restaurants in Tokyo than Paris, which pisses off French people ad nauseum. But those restaurants, a lot of them are Italian and French. You know, young Japanese chefs want to go stage in Europe and come bring that home, and you know, on Japanese denim, or you know, had Japanese.
Kewpie.
Yeah, they really know how to master things, and so that pairing of sake with Italian and French and non-Japanese food is happening in a big way in Japan. So it's not just like us coming up with this harebrained idea of having sake with bolognese. It's actually something that exists and makes sense.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, I can't wait much longer. I need some sake. So you've selected three really, I would say, very, very different in style. I'm kind of guessing as what you want to start with, but tell me, where should we start, Taka? Of course.
Because we should start with some white wine, and this is the whitest of the white wine.
The whitest of all the white wines. Now, this is one of our go-tos when someone, a wine lover, is even a little bit interested in sake, and you can bring everybody over with something like this. Tell us about this brand, this brewer, and the story here.
So it's a your wine drinker, because this producer is the fourth generation owner of his family business, but he was not excited. He liked wine much more than sake. So much that he was so in love with Chablis that he just moved to Burgundy, speaking no French or English, and trying to understand what was going on. And I think a lot of producers were so charmed by this guy's impulsiveness that they gave him, that people really treated him a lot. He returned home determined to make sake through the lens of a winemaker. And what that means to me is, I mean, his big thing is tension, and really trying to create this tension and the acid structure, but he also loves minerality. And in this region of Japan, in this area of Yamaguchi, a lot of producers will filter the minerality out of the water, but there's 9 kilometers of limestone caves that flow into a river next to the brewery. That's his primary water source. And so water will cascade over these naturally formed limestone terraces. And so there's so much limestone in the water, and sake is 80% water. You add it at every stage of production. So that's going to have a big impact. It's also estate grown rice. And so that limestone water is rice plants. And so I think there's clearly a lot of that classic green melon that you get from this style of like more slow fermentation that gives you that melon. But I think the minerality is present even on the nose. And in terms of food pairing, what I love about the sake is it takes you on such a journey, because I get melon, I get maybe like a little bit of a green, like lime leaf note, some minerality, but then it's really creamy in the mid palate, and it's super herbaceous on the finish in a way that doesn't jump out to me on the nose.
I think if you were to taste this on someone blind and say, oh, it's, Sauvignon or something like that, like a Chenin Blanc or a Chablis or something like that, that's so mineral driven, most people would be hard pressed to, pick out the ricey notes, which are there very subtly so, and because there's so much aromatic and that crunchy minerality, which you're talking about, which I'm just in love with that nose. It's nuts. Of course, on the palate, acidity, which is so key to that wine drinking experience, and great texture. It's not super heavy, but also not one of these that's like barely there,
Absolutely. And this, he's obsessed with the world of wine, and so when he comes to the US, he's so much happier to be like in the car with has 5 bottles of wine and a bottle of sake in the bag. And when we do he always wants to do a limestone theme instead of a theme or anything like that. So where we started with a Blanc de Blanc champagne, had this sake, had a Sylvaner, and had a like very delicate red Burgundy, a Sauvignon Le Bon from Simone B, winemaker, a Japanese winemaker. And And that limestone theme like really expressed itself and brought it full circle and got people thinking about sake, not in this siloed, okay, I'm eating Japanese food, drinking sake out of a tiny little cup, but really actually being forced to consider what was in the glass, which I think is super cool.
How important do you think for creating this style? I mean, obviously the water, very, very important, as you mentioned, are the rice varietals. Do you think that's a really big part of the conversation when they're deciding, okay, this is what we want to do, we need this or that style of rice, or is it less important than
it's less important than we want to think it is. It's certainly not analogous to wine grapes. There are certain rice varietals that are really idiosyncratic and have a really pronounced flavor, like omachi is one of them. It's got this smoky, spicy herbaceousness. Dewa Sansan is one to me that's very grassy and spicy, but almost 70% of sake made in Japan is made using Yamana Nishiki and Gohyaku Mangoku, which are pretty malleable styles. I would say that Yamana Nishiki is a little more generous and soft, where Gohyaku Mangoku generally creates a leaner weight of sake, but you can make any kind of sake you want from those two types of rice. So it isn't important. And part of sake being non-vintage is you can correct for a lot of things happening during that rice season, during production. Like if you had a dry season, you can soak the rice longer.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting stuff. So maybe it's a little more analogous to distilling whiskey, whereas obviously corn, high corn content in a bourbon is going to change the flavor, but if you blind out 5 bourbons and 5 rye, most people won't be able to necessarily tell the difference based on the varietal, because there's so much other important things about the flavor. One thing I've always wanted to ask, obviously, a huge part of sake making is in that fermentation stage, and multiple fermentations, really, that koji selection, and how important is that step in terms of breaking down the longer chain sugars into accessible sugars for the alcohol yeast to get? How important is the koji selection in terms of the flavor? Is that a factor?
It's the most important.
Wow.
It's a sake proverb that the first thing you must consider is the production of the koji, because when you're propagating that enzyme on steamed sake rice, I mean, the first enzymatic conversion is steaming the rice, because you have to it's like a alpha to beta style starch conversion, where if you don't, like, before you steam it, the starch is kind of curled up in this ball, and when you steam it, it stretches out, so there's areas for that enzyme to penetrate. But the more you propagate of that enzyme on the rice, the more glucose you're going to have and the more amino acid glutamates. And so if you want a high umami sake, you need to have very moldy rice. But the more moldy rice you have, the more sugar you're going to have. And so then you need to use the yeast that's going to eat a lot of glucose, because every step after koji is in tandem, right? You have saccharification and fermentation happening at the same time, because you only convert 20% of the rice to koji. So 20% of that moldy rice is turning 80% of just regular steamed rice into sugar, while yeast is already eating sugar and producing alcohol. So just having the right amount of food and the right appetite of the yeast and matching those two is complicated, but how much koji you propagate decides what kind of sake it's going to be.
And there are what, 2 or 3 styles of koji? I mean, it's is it pretty ubiquitous across the?
Yeah, almost all sake is made using a yellow koji. And so yellow koji gives you lots of glucose, gives you lots of amino acid glutamates. There is some experimentation with black and white koji, which is predominantly used for spirits and produces more citric acid. So I'm very curious to see how that trend is going, because I've had some really, really great white and black koji sakes, but it's certainly still a learning curve.
Interesting. And yellow koji is the same that would be used for making soy sauce or something like that, right? Is that accurate?
Same strain of Orize. Like, as a brewer, you're probably not going to have 10 koji sales reps coming to see you, like, trying to sell you their cool strain of koji. So it's really how you grow it that is the determining factor.
Very, very cool. Well, this is like such. Oh. Huh. The lights turned off in here. How weird. Guess it's motion. There
Well,
we go.
with the darkness in the room, we should go into a red wine sake. So
Let's go. Maybe.
yeah, let's have some because I want to.
Yuho.
Training wheels.
I love Yuho.
So I love Yuho too. This is such a fun producer, and this is a female producer, and which is strange enough because things, gender equality in the workplace not being one of them. And so this is the sake that we're having, by the way, the Yuho Junmai. So this is from Ishikawa Prefecture. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a color tint here. So sake comes out of the tank looking much more like this. Sake generally doesn't come out of the tank water white and colorless. And when it is water white and colorless, usually there's some charcoal filtration that's been applied. So this producer is really about making more of a natural style that's really low intervention, that's a really true expression of the rice that's used. She uses a much more rice, Noto Hikari. It's a local Ishikawa rice. She was born and raised in Tokyo, was selling Hot Wheels cars, working for Mattel. And in 1991, when premium sake was first commercially distributed around Japan, a lot of these local countryside breweries went out of business because they had a captive audience, and all of a sudden, no matter where you lived in Japan, you could get good sake from around the country. And so it put a lot of these smaller companies out of business, which was good for us as a consumer. Your odds of walking into a store and blindly grabbing a bottle of sake were much better. But these companies were folding. So her father, who's from this town in Ishikawa, bought the brewery. And Hot Wheels cars are really nostalgic for Americans, but if you've ever played with Japanese toys, a car that you actually have to move back and forth on your own is not that exciting. And so the business was not going well, and she was trying to figure out an elegant exit strategy. And her dad was like, well, move across the country and run this brewery. And she just decided to have fun, and she found a really great brewer who's amazingly talented, and they came up with this style together that's much more soulful and expansive. This is a sake that, I mean, I will say that most sakes I say you can leave open for 2 to 3 weeks and they're totally sturdy. This is a sake that you could leave open for over a year and it just gets better. She always says the last glass in the bottle is the best. And she also says you cannot destroy the sake. And I have tried. I have boiled the sake and let it cool back down to room temperature. I've left a bottle open in direct sunlight for over a year. And I love telling the story because I think people are so precious about sake sometimes, and they think it has such a fleeting shelf life and you have to drink it right away. But this is a sake that, honestly, if you decant it, it tastes even better. I love the more air that gets into it. And it's a very, like, the flavor profile and aroma is very Thanksgiving to me. Like, it's a lot of spice and cidery notes of fig and pear.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think this was like a marketing choice that the old style marketers of sake felt was really important to encourage people to drink their sake quickly and buy more, perhaps. But from my perspective, it's so much more powerful to be able to have 4 or 5 bottles in the fridge at any one time and say, oh, look what we're having. Do we want to open a bottle of wine? No, let's just have a glass of the Yuho, which would be great with the bolognese, or whatever it is. And I find it really brings it into like the bar sphere where you're like selecting a whiskey, and it can sit there forever. I mean, of course, there are some super elegant style, particularly the Junmai Daigen Joes that are so subtle and yeah, after a while you're going to lose some of that. But how often are you really going to drink that? And these are so much more approachable. I love this style. For me, this is like every day I can just crush a glass of this and just be as happy as can be.
Texturally, it's very chewy. It's very substantial compared to the taka. Like, this is almost a meal on its own. And I agree. Like, I think for me, this is definitely a red wine sake because the more, like, if it's cold, the more your body temperature warms it up, the more expressive it gets, where that would not happen with the taka.
Yeah. Tell me, what in the brewery are they doing to get such a different character beyond just, the stuff we've already talked about, the koji and the rice? I mean, there must be another step. How do they make it indestructible? What's the secret?
We already know that this is more koji propagation on the rice because we have more umami, we have more acidity. And so with the higher glucose level, there's a yeast that's a faster, a hardier, sturdier yeast that's going to work at a higher temperature and produce higher levels of acidity. And then we already know this has no charcoal filtration. So it just has more concentration of flavor from not being charcoal filtered. But this is also aged for a year in the bottle at room temperature, which is quite cool. I mean, they don't make a lot of economically efficient choices at this brewery. It's certainly not economically efficient to age sake in a 720 milliliter bottle, but the bottle aging, I think, gives it that grippiness on the palate. Sake doesn't have tannins, but you feel these walnut skin tannins or tea tannins I think come from the bottle aging.
Really, really interesting. So they're doing a lot of that work to. Is oxidation a factor here, or is it because how reactive is a sake like this to oxygen? I mean, I guess not positively so, right? But what?
Well, so sake is benefits from the food science concept of the Maillard reaction, right? So if something, so sake, like beef turning brown when you cook it or bread turning brown, will take on oxidative characteristics without needing exposure to air. So so it does change in the bottle. I mean, it does become more caramelized. There's a caramelized nut quality that comes out from that aging. And if we age this longer, that would become more pronounced, but it's not, it mimics oxidation, but it's not truly oxidation.
Okay. Interesting. So it's not like this last one that's actually having a proper aging component, which is I haven't had this yet. I'm so excited to taste this.
Had it? Okay. Well, be careful when you open it. Just because there's a little, there's some dissolved CO2 in this bottle. It's not going to like jump off, but
I got it.
A bit of
no problems there.
A quiet size. So I love this sake. I'm so excited that you're trying. When I was talking to one of my colleagues today, and he was saying, when I do consumer events, he's like, people always come to the table and they say, oh, what's the polishing ratio of the sake? And that's the first question I ask. He's like, finally, I'll just ask them why I'm asking that. And no reason, right? Polishing, you can't taste a sake and say, we haven't said that once yet. Oh, you can clearly taste that this is 65% polished rice. You can't. And so if it doesn't express itself in the glass, why is it important? People just ask because they think they're supposed to ask. And so this producer finally was like, you know what? Screw this system. I'm not even telling you how much this rice is polished. I refuse to be categorized, which is why they call it Untitled. This producer is a total OG. They've been brewing sake since the 1500s, so continuously.
Yeah, I was going to say that this is not the new school here. It's not as if they're changing things, but they are in a lot of ways, it seems.
Yeah.
In terms of how it's presented.
So he's been continuously brewing for 24 generations. And this is a super interesting sake because the fermentation is arrested by fortified sake aged in cedar. So this is 13% alcohol, but it's genshu, it's cask strength. And during fermentation, there's a fourth addition of cedar aged fortified sake, kijoshu, that arrests the fermentation. So we have something that's 13% alcohol. And sake normally is a little too delicate to take to wood. I'm sure you've had cedar aged sakes that just wood, right? And so with this, I love it because it has this like sarsaparilla, vanilla, black cherry, really unique thing going on the nose, but on the palate, I feel like it's like white burgundy on the palate.
Oh wow, not at all. It's such a dichotomy on the nose to the palate. Crazy acidity, and yeah, you got it with the lower alcohol. I always expect it to be like just nothing, but there's lots of texture and weightiness to it. Wow, what a fun sake. This must be very, very expensive, Monica.
It is. I'm sure you probably sell it for like a little under $80 a bottle.
How much?
You would probably sell it for like around $80 a bottle, maybe a couple dollars less.
Great. We're gonna crush with this stuff.
It's a great package, and there's nothing else like it.
Oh my God, this is so good. This is the Untitled from Kojimaya,
Mm-hmm.
established in 1597. Wow.
Yeah, I love that.
Wow.
Like it has so much impact, and the impact's not coming from alcohol, which is really nice. I think this is
Yeah,
for. I think this could really broaden the universe of who's drinking sake.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you could serve this in any context and it would, I mean, this even maybe more so than the taka, is really, particularly on the palate, is really bridging that gap between wine and sake, and doing so in a totally amazing traditional way. That's so cool. Is that a process that they developed, or something that just specifically for this product, or something that is traditionally done to add the cedar fortified, or is it a totally new process?
So that fourth edition of adding during fermentation is something that is a very old way of making sake that they're trying to revive. And so part of they're really into their history. And so if you go visit this brewery, they have a little museum of they brewing in wood and brewing in clay centuries ago. But adding the cedar barrel aged sake as the fourth edition is I have not heard of anyone else doing that. And I
Mm,
think that dissolved CO2 makes so much sense when you taste it, because this is a sake that I don't know if it's a red wine sake or white wine sake. Like I could drink
mm-hmm.
with a rich hearty dish, but I could also drink it on a patio in the summer. And so it really just
Yeah.
incredible versatility.
I think white burgundy was a great crossover. And that, what's so interesting, because I think a lot of wine people do miss the acidity that you get from obviously fruit, which has tons of acid, where obviously rice has none, and you have to create the acids through these biological reactions. The dissolved CO2 gives the sensation of acidity, or adds a sensation of acidity, which is very familiar to people drinkers of sparkling wine, because that's something that's very obvious when you're tasting a bubbly wine, as opposed to if you leave a glass out for hours and it goes flat. The acidity, or the perception of acidity, is much lower. Austin asks, what would you recommend for dry tart side? All three of these would be fine for someone who doesn't like sweet sake. In fact,
But I think
95% of all the sake we sell would, to most palates, be considered dry, although varying levels of sweetness, based on the other flavors around the actual sugar content. So almost everything we sell is what I would categorize as dry, or in the realm of dry things, not the dessert style sake. So yeah, either of these, I think, for somebody who wants something crisp and dry, and interesting, and if you want something richer and more robust, the Yuho. But none of these have any perceived sweetness or sugary character to them.
Yeah,
Um,
that point for Austin to Austin's comment, sake doesn't have any tartaric acid, which is great. It's not going to give you heart, not going to erode your teeth enamel, but it doesn't have, when you think of a dry wine and that really, really crispness you get. I mean, sake, you can mimic that mouth-watering quality in sake with deliberate astringency on the finish, but it's not going to be crisp in the way that a really dry white wine is. But acidity is where sugar hides, right? And so there isn't that acid for sugar to hide. It's actually less sugar in terms of grams per liter than a lot of wines, which I think, there's a myriad of reasons people request dry. A lot of them are sugar related. And so if you give them a dry Riesling that actually has 30 grams per liter of sugar, they might not be happy. And so I think it's an interesting, there's a lot of ways to work around that request for super dry with sake.
yeah, no, and it's a complicated factor, and of course, yeah, if it's I don't want to perceive sweetness, then you'll have a different answer than if I really need something without sugar in it. Um, that's gonna affect, and that's one thing I don't like about the system. You guys don't use really the normal system on your
No.
um because it has all, the normal old school way of marketing sake is they put the acidity levels and the sugar levels based on some scale that they've developed. Nobody understands it. Nobody knows what +2 or -2 or whatever this is. Literally, it's just the geeks and the producers, and everybody else is sort of like, I don't remember which one's sweet, plus or minus, or
So, it's measured with a hydrometer. It's calculating the density of the sake compared to the density of water, right? But density and sweetness don't necessarily go hand in hand. If something's genshu and undiluted, it's going to be heavier. If the water in that region, has more minerality, it might be denser. And so there's so many reasons for people for density to show up on a scale that don't indicate sweetness. And if something's +3 and something's +5 doesn't necessarily taste more dry. I think that scale is helpful if it's extreme, like -10 or +15. That's informative. But anything in between is kind of just not that.
Yeah, and that's so key. Not to mention, consumers don't know one way or the other, which so it's not like the back of the label explains usually the system. The more, I think the Germans do a pretty good job of, or the Alsatians, they'll put very clearly dry, medium dry, sweet. But I don't think it's so cut and dry with sake in the way that it is, because you're lacking that acidity and you have all these other flavor components that are augmenting our perception of what we're doing. But in a general sense, almost everything we sell is dry, quote unquote, dry feeling sake, even though there may be high sugar levels compared to certain other products. So it's a complicated question, but any of the ones we've looked at today, you certainly won't perceive any sort of obvious sweetness to them. What foods would you pair with unfiltered sake, or are they meant to be drink without food? Oh, Deja, great question. Monica, you want to field this one?
Yeah. So, Deja, I assume you mean by unfiltered sake, you're talking about the cloudy sake that has some of the rice sediment from fermentation still in the liquid. And so I can understand the meant to be drunk without, because sometimes they can be like a meal, right? They're pretty rich and creamy. In general, I think about texture a lot with sake, and although with wine, you almost never recommend something that's 15% alcohol with a spicy dish. The creaminess in cloudy nigori sakes can really calm down intense spice in foods. And so I love sweet and spicy food with a lot of nigori sakes, like a coconut milk Thai curry or curry and chicken wings. I think that can be really fun. I think desserts can be fun. There is a new trend of drier cloudy sakes that are almost translucent and quite lean. And those, I think, almost have a citrus peel quality, where something you would squeeze a lemon on. It's great with whether you're having fried calamari or oysters in the half shell. Tofu is a great pairing with that kind of leaner style of cloudy sake too.
Awesome. What a thorough answer, Monica. Well, we still got about 60 people hanging out. That's always a good sign. I'll guess we'll take some questions. With craft spirits taking off in the U.S., is there a similar trend with sake? Are there people sourcing sake in the U.S. like they are with whiskeys?
Yeah, great question. So I think this question is saying, are people making sake in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think so. I think he may be referring to like more like independent bottlers, where like people are going out there and buying lots of whiskey in Scotland and then bottling it on their own label. There is a little bit of that in sake. Certainly people who are trying to brand other brewers' products as their own, and then a couple of people who are making selections in different styles and putting their own label on it from Japan. But there are also some decent craft brewers of sake, although I haven't really explored that category. There's one very good one in Oakland.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, so to your point, there is a private label boom. There are a lot of people using a spirits model, like a Patron, model to try to find, they think that the reason that sake hasn't gotten mainstream is that there's not one brand that everyone's drinking that's like cool to drink when you're out at a bar. And so there are a lot of those business models that have varying success levels. And there also are very large producers in Japan who have outposts in the US to cut down on costs. So California has a lot of them with Gekkaken and Folsom, Ozeki and Hollister, Takara and Berkeley. But the American craft sake boom has really happened in the last 10 years or so. And Den, who you mentioned, is great. And what I really like about Den is he really highlights the farmers who grow the rice for him. And so rather than saying this is made with this kind of rice, you really understand the terroir a little more, which we don't talk about very often with sake in Japan. And what I think is the most successful with sake brewed in the US is not sake trying to pretend like it's Japanese, but sake trying to reach a new audience. Craft beer drinkers are a great audience to capture because they're always want to try something new. They're not your like super brand loyal person who has the same product every time they go out. And they're interested in things that are weird and fun. And so if you're making a dry hopped sake that smells a little bit like an IPA, a purist would never want to drink that, but a craft beer drinker would be all about it. And I think craft beer drinkers gravitate towards whatever is local. And so I like this trend. I'm very excited about the good craft brewers in the US, which include Den, which include Brooklyn Kura. And I think they're just getting started.
Great question. Cool. Well, I'm weird and fun. You are. That's great. You can be both, and we appreciate that. So yeah, this has been so informative and exciting and fun. I'm so happy to try this Untitled Kojimaya. Do you have other sake from this brewer? We've had some, right?
Yeah. So that brewer makes like the Toko Sunrise and Toko Untitled.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. Oh, great. Cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Like totally different, crazy thing. I'm so glad I got to watch you try it for the first time.
Me too, Monica. Well, we'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to ask any last minute questions. Any big plans? You going to Japan at all?
They don't seem to really want anyone coming over from here right now. They're really trying to get this new variant under control. But as soon as they open their doors, I will be there.
Awesome. I cannot wait to get there myself and hopefully tour a couple of these awesome breweries. It's, I've loved sake forever, but there's nothing like walking into the first time I walked into a single malt distillery in Scotland. I mean, it just changes your whole perception. So, yes, Handsome Curtis, are these available online? I have both the Taka and the Yuho in stock, ready to roll. The Untitled, maybe, but yeah, they're all online and available. We can ship sake throughout California and maybe other states. Wine states, I think, is okay for us.
Yeah.
And so yeah, check those out, and ever expanding selection of sake. Another great thing to note: if you ever are out at a restaurant and wondering what sake to order, and you see this is backwards, but it says Vine Connections on the back, you're gonna probably have a great time. So definitely keep that in mind. Just like with wine, the importer is so important for reliable quality, and you do such a great job over there, Monica. So we're so grateful to have you with us, and I thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our next lunch.
Can't wait.
What's next, and hopefully we'll be touring a sake brewery together before we know it.
I can't wait. Let's definitely do that. Oh, I'm surprised there's been no bourbon questions, but here's an Armagnac question. No, the answer to that is no. No and cantata soon. Looking at samples. Cool. We'll talk about it next week. We're going to open up next week, like maybe the barrel bourbons. I don't know. There's so much stuff to drink. So we'll have a fun one next week. But thanks everybody for watching and hanging with Monica. And we'll see you soon, Monica. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Ciao.